The message came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night while I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through a shoebox of old photographs. I'd been doing that a lot since my husband passed 2 winters ago. Looking backward because looking forward had started to feel like staring into a room with the lights off. My phone buzzed against the wood, and I almost didn't pick it up. At my age, a phone ringing late at night usually means somebody's in the hospital. But it wasn't a call. It was a text from my son. "Mom, we've talked it over and we think it's healthiest if we take some space. Please respect our boundaries and don't reach out. We'll contact you when we're ready." I read it 3 times. I want to tell you my hand shook, that I gasped, that I felt my heart break open right there in the kitchen. But that's not what happened. What happened was stranger. I felt nothing for a moment, like the words were a foreign language I was waiting for my brain to translate. And then, slowly, a kind of cold clarity came over me. Because I knew, the way you know your own name, that my son James didn't write that message. James says, "Hey Ma," and forgets punctuation and texts me pictures of his dog. James doesn't say, "Respect our boundaries." That was Tara. That was my daughter-in-law's voice dressed up in my son's name, polished smooth like a river stone. And the worst part, the part that settled into my stomach like a swallowed coin, was that James had let her send it. He hadn't written it, but he'd allowed it. He'd handed her the phone and looked away. I set the photographs down. I picked the phone back up and I typed, without one tremble in my fingers. "Understood. I'll be cancelling the standing transfers for the mortgage and the truck payment first thing in the morning. Take all the space you need." Then I put the phone face down and I finished my tea, which had gone cold, and I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum. Let me explain about those transfers, because you need to understand what I'd been doing, what I'd let myself become. After my husband died, I came into a little money. Not a fortune, but his pension had a survivor benefit. And there was a small life insurance policy, and our house was paid off. I was 71 years old and comfortable in a way I'd never been comfortable in my whole working life. I'd spent 40 years as a school cafeteria manager in a little town outside Toledo, counting trays and balancing a budget down to the penny, and suddenly I had something left over at the end of every month. So when James and Tara bought that big house out in the new development, the one with the stone facade and the 3-car garage they didn't need, and James called me sounding stressed about the mortgage, I offered $1,400 a month toward their payment. I told myself it was an investment in my grandchildren's stability. Then it was the truck, a $400 a month payment on a black pickup that Tara said James needed for work, though James worked in an office. Then it was the kids' private school. Then it was Tara's wellness retreats. Then it was a credit card I'd co-signed because their credit was temporarily tight. I'd been sending them close to $2,600 a month for 3 years. I did the math one night and felt sick. And then I did what I always did, which was tell myself that's what family is for. That's what mothers do. We give. We pour ourselves out and call it love. But sitting in my kitchen that night after that text, I finally let myself see the shape of the thing. They didn't want me. They wanted the money. And the moment I'd become inconvenient, too present, too prone to asking questions, too much of a witness, they decided to erase me while keeping the checks. Except they'd made one mistake. They told me to go away before they remembered they couldn't afford for me to. I slept 4 hours that night, and in the morning I called my bank and stopped every automatic transfer with my name on it. The young man on the phone asked if I was sure, and I said I'd never be more sure of anything. For 3 days, silence. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then on the 4th day, my phone rang. Tara. I let it go to voicemail and listened later, sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot. Her voice was honey poured over gravel. "Hi, Mom. It's me. I think there's been a misunderstanding with the bank. Some payments didn't go through, and the mortgage company is calling. Can you give us a ring when you get this? James is so stressed he's not sleeping. We love you. Call us back. We love you." They'd told me to never contact them again. and now it was "we love you." I didn't call back. The next morning there was another message, this one with the honey gone and the gravel showing through. "Mom, we really need to sort this out. You can't just cut us off like this over a little family disagreement. That's not how a mother acts. That's not how a mother acts. That's not how a mother acts." I sat with that one a long time. On the 6th day, James called, and I answered, because he was my boy. Because I'd carried him and fed him and stayed up with him through croup and heartbreak. And because some part of me still hoped that if I could just hear him without her in the room, I'd find my son again. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Mom." His voice was tight. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what, honey?" "The payments. The mortgage company called Tara twice today. You can't just—" "Mum, we depend on that." There it was. Not "I miss you." Not "I miss you." Not "I'm sorry we sent that text." "We depend on that." I closed my eyes. "You depend on the money," I said. "That's not—" "Mom, that's not fair." "James, you told me to never reach out to you again. I'm just respecting your wishes." Tara wrote that when she was upset, it wasn't literal. Then what is literal, James? Tell me what part of the last 3 years was literal. When's the last time you came to see me without needing something? When's the last time I held the kids for more than the 20 minutes it takes you to drop something off? He didn't answer. I could hear him breathing, and behind him, faintly, I could hear her voice, low and steady, coaching him. "Tell her," and then muffled. "Is Tara telling you what to say right now?" I asked. "No. Mom, she sees things clearly. She knows what's good for our family." And that was the moment I understood that my son was gone, at least the version of him I'd raised. Somewhere in the last 7 years, he'd handed over the steering wheel of his own life, and the woman driving had decided his mother was excess weight. "If she knows what's good for your family," I said quietly, "then you don't need me. Goodbye, James." And I hung up before my voice could betray me, because the rage I felt was the kind that brings tears, and I would not give them my tears over the phone. I might have left it there. I might have just kept my money, licked my wounds, and let them figure out how to make their payments without me. That's what a sensible woman would do. But 2 days later, something happened that turned this from a story about a mother's hurt feelings into something much darker. I was at the hardware store buying a new washer for a leaky faucet when a woman about my age stopped me in the plumbing aisle. "Excuse me, you're James's mother, aren't you?" "Linda's mom?" "I'm sorry, I mean Tara's husband's mother." She laughed nervously. "I'm so sorry, I'm Patricia. I live across the cul-de-sac from your son and his wife." I said yes, I was, and how nice to meet her, and I started to move along, but she put a hand on my cart. Would you have a minute for a coffee? There's a place next door. There's something I've been wanting to say to somebody, and I never knew who. You seem like the right person." The seriousness in her face made my stomach drop. We sat in a booth at the diner next to the hardware store, and Patricia wrapped both hands around her mug and didn't quite look at me. "I'm not a busybody," she started. "I want you to know that. My husband tells me I imagine things. But I've been watching that house for a year now, and something is wrong." "What do you mean wrong?" "Your son's wife, Tara." Patricia chose her words carefully. "She runs that household like a warden. Your son used to wave when he mowed the lawn. Now he barely looks up. And the kids, your grandkids, they're so quiet. Quiet in a way children shouldn't be." She paused. "But that's not really why I wanted to talk to you. It's the trucks." "The trucks? They're removing trucks, not the big ones. Those U-Haul trailers, the little ones you tow behind a car, 3 times in the last month, always after dark. The first time I thought they were finally clearing out that overstuffed garage. But then," she pulled out her phone with hands that trembled slightly. "My daughter sells furniture online, so I'm always on Facebook Marketplace. And last week I saw a dining set listed by some account I didn't recognize. But I knew that dining room. I've eaten Thanksgiving in that dining room before things got strange. I'd know that table anywhere. And there were other listings from the same area. A riding lawnmower, a set of golf clubs, a child's bedroom set. She turned the phone toward me. There it was, a photograph of a white canopy bed, listed for $250. That's my granddaughter's bed, I whispered. That's Sophie's bed. I thought it might be something like that, Patricia said gently. My sister went through this. Different state, years ago. Her husband seemed perfect. Charming, handsome, everybody loved him. And then one day he was gone. And so was everything they had. Drained the accounts. Sold what he could. Left her with 2 kids and a mountain of debt and a name on the loans that wasn't even his real name. She looked at me steadily. I don't know your daughter-in-law, but I know what it looks like when somebody is quietly emptying a house out from the inside, getting ready to disappear. And I know it's the spouse who never sees it coming because they're too close. I thought somebody who loves those children should know. I drove home in a fog. The text, the sudden need for distance, the panic about money the second I cut it off, and now this. Somebody selling my grandchildren's beds in the middle of the night. The pieces wouldn't fit the picture I'd been carrying. I'd assumed Tara was just controlling and cold, a daughter-in-law who'd turned my son against me. But controlling people don't sell the canopy bed. Controlling people decorate. People who are about to run sell everything that isn't nailed down. That night, I couldn't eat. I kept thinking about Sophie, my granddaughter, who was 7 and used to call me on the landline just to tell me about her day, until the call stopped 6 months ago. I kept thinking about little Danny, only 4, and I thought, what if it isn't James doing the selling? What if it isn't Tara either? What if I'd been so busy nursing my own hurt that I'd missed something that put my grandchildren in danger? I remembered that Patricia had mentioned her sister hired somebody. The next morning I called her and asked, and she gave me a name and a number, a private investigator 2 towns over who specialized in financial fraud, a retired detective named Walter Brennan who ran a small office above a pharmacy. I sat in my driveway with my finger over the call button for a full 10 minutes. I knew that once I made this call, I couldn't pretend anymore. I'd be investigating my own son's marriage. People would say I was a bitter old woman who couldn't let go, who couldn't accept that her son had chosen his wife. Maybe I was. But then I thought about Sophie's bed listed for $250, and I pressed the button. Walter Brennan had a grey mustache and tired eyes and an office that smelled like coffee and old carpet. He listened to my whole story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, I want to tell you something before we go further. 9 times out of 10, when somebody sits in that chair telling me their in-law is hiding something, it turns out to be an affair, or gambling, or just bad money habits. Ordinary human messes. But once in a while, it's the 10th thing. And the 10th thing is somebody who isn't who they say they are. He tapped his pen. The midnight selling, the international interest in your money, the isolation of your son from his family. Those aren't the signs of an unhappy marriage. Those are the signs of an exit being prepared. I'd like your permission to look into Tara, quietly, just to be sure. I gave it. I wrote him a check, and for the first time in 3 years, writing a check for that family felt like the right thing to do. It took Walter 11 days. In that time, James called twice more, each call angrier, the mortgage now 60 days behind, a foreclosure notice apparently in the mail. I didn't budge. And then Walter called and asked me to come to his office, and his voice had changed. It had the flat, careful tone of a man delivering news he'd rather not. Your daughter-in-law's name isn't Tara Hartwell, he said when I sat down. I mean, it is now, legally by marriage. But before she met your son, she was Tara Voss. And before that, in Arizona, she was Teresa Maddox. And before that, in Florida, she was Tracy Beaumont. He slid a folder across the desk. She's been married 3 times that I can document, possibly 4. The first husband in Florida died in a single-car accident 18 months into the marriage. There was a life insurance policy. The second in Arizona. She divorced after 2 years. He came out of it bankrupt, and she came out of it with the house. Your son is number 3. And Mrs. Hartwell, in every case there's the same pattern. She finds a man with assets, or, better yet, a man with a generous family. She isolates him, and then, when she's bled the situation dry, she liquidates and moves on. I felt the room tilt. The selling, I said. The beds. She's converting everything to cash. My guess is she's got a destination already picked out. There's a wire transfer inquiry I traced to a bank account in Belize. He folded his hands. Here's what worries me most. Your son co-signed a great deal of debt, and so did you. When she disappears, she'll leave him holding all of it, and she'll likely have already moved money out of reach. He'll be left with 2 children, a foreclosed house, and a bankruptcy. And the kids. He hesitated. In 2 of the prior situations, there were no children. This is the first time there are children involved. I don't know what that changes, but I don't like not knowing. I want to tell you I was angry, and I was, but underneath the anger was a cold animal fear for 2 small children sleeping in a house with a woman who collected husbands and disposed of them. What do? I asked. James won't listen to me. He thinks I'm the enemy. That's exactly why you can't just tell him, Walter said. If you call your son and say your wife is a con artist with 3 dead or ruined husbands, he'll defend her, he'll warn her, and she'll vanish that night with the kids or without them, and will lose any chance of protecting anybody. Trust me. I've seen the spouse defend the predator right up until the handcuffs go on, and sometimes after. He leaned forward. We do this the right way. We bring in the police. We let them build the case. And when they move, your son has to be there to see it with his own eyes. It's the only thing that breaks the spell. So we waited, and it was the hardest waiting of my life. Walter connected me with a detective named Olivia Reyes who worked financial crimes, a sharp, soft-spoken woman who took the folder seriously the moment she saw the multiple identities. She told me they could move on fraud and forgery. Tara had forged James's signature on 2 of the loans, and that alone was enough. But they needed a few days to get the warrant in order, and they needed Tara to feel safe. I need her relaxed, Detective Reyes told me. If she thinks she's been discovered, she runs. So whatever you do, don't tip your hand. That's when I had the idea, and when I said it out loud, Walter actually smiled. I'll invite them to dinner, I said. I'll call James and tell him I've had time to think, that I miss them, that I want to make peace. I'll offer to turn the payments back on. She'll come for that. She'll come because she still thinks I'm the cash machine, and she'll want to lock it back down before she leaves. It made me ill to say it. The idea of smiling at that woman across my own dinner table. But if it kept her in town 3 more days while the warrant came through, I'd do it. I called James the next afternoon. I made my voice warm and a little tearful, which wasn't hard. Honey, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I hate how we left things. You're my son, and those are my grandbabies, and I can't lose you over money and pride. Will you come to dinner Saturday? All of you? Let me cook for you like I used to, and I'll get the payments started again. I never should have let it get this far. There was a long pause, and then a muffled conversation, and I knew Tara was right there, weighing it. And then James came back on, and his voice was lighter than I'd heard it in a year. Yeah, Ma. Yeah, we'd like that. Saturday's good. Detective Reyes coached me. She gave me a small recorder I tucked into the napkin holder. Not because they expected I'd need it, but because, as she said, you never know what a person will say at a table where they feel they've won. The warrant, she told me, would be served Sunday morning. They'd come to James and Tara's house around 9. I was to find a reason to be there. Bring the children a gift, she said. You'll want to be there for your son when it happens, and for the kids. I cooked all of Saturday. Pot roast, because it was James's favourite as a boy. and in apple pie, and dinner rolls from the recipe my own mother taught me. I set the table for the adults and put out the little step-stool chair I'd kept for the grandkids. At 6 o'clock the doorbell rang, and when I opened it, Sophie threw her arms around my waist and held on, and I felt her thin shoulders shaking, and I had to blink hard and breathe. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered. "I missed you. Daddy said you were mad at us." "Oh, sweet pea," I said into her hair. "Grandma's never been mad at you, not for 1 second." Tara came up the walk behind them in a cream-coloured coat, smiling that bright, even smile that I now understood was a mask-sized and fitted like a surgeon fits a glove. "Mom," she said, and embraced me, and her embrace was perfect and meant nothing. James hugged me last, and he felt smaller than he used to, diminished, a man wearing his own body like a borrowed suit. I served the dinner. I asked about the children's school, and Tara answered for them. I asked James about work, and Tara answered for him. I poured the wine and made the toast, to family. And Tara held my eyes when she clinked her glass against mine, and I made myself hold hers back. Near the end, over pie, I slid a paper across the table. "It's just a little agreement," I said, light as I could make it, "so the accountant has a record of what I've given over the years. For my taxes, would you both sign it? It says you receive the funds, that's all." Tara read it twice and I held my breath because Walter had told me a signature on that paper, acknowledging years of received money would matter later. And then she smiled and signed it and slid the pen to James, and he signed it without reading it at all, the way he signed everything she put in front of him. They left around 9, and Sophie hugged me twice, and Danny fell asleep on James's shoulder, and I stood in my doorway and waved at the taillights, and then went inside and was sick in the bathroom. Sunday morning I drove to their house with a wrapped puzzle for Sophie and a toy fire truck for Danny. I arrived at 5 minutes to 9. James opened the door, surprised, a little wary. But he let me in, and I gave the children their gifts in the front hall, and Sophie was tearing the paper when I heard the cars in the driveway. 2 of them, Detective Reyes and 3 officers, came up the walk, and Tara, standing in the kitchen doorway with a coffee mug, went absolutely still. What happened next happened fast and slow at the same time, the way the worst moments do. Detective Reyes said Tara's name, her real name, the first one, Tracy Beaumont, and Tara's mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. James looked at his wife, then at the officers, then at me, and the betrayal in his face was aimed at me, and the betrayal in his face was aimed at me, all of it. "Mum, what did you do?" he shouted, even as Detective Reyes read the charges: fraud, forgery, identity theft, and even as Tara, who had stopped pretending the instant her real name hit the air, looked at me across that kitchen with a flat, cold, assessing stare that told me everything Walter had said was true. There was no love in that woman. There never had been. There was only the next mark and the exit. She didn't cry. She didn't protest much. She asked very calmly to speak to her lawyer, and as they walked her out in handcuffs, she didn't look at James once. Not once. Not at the man whose life she'd inhabited for 7 years. Not at the children she'd tucked in at night. And it was James seeing that, James watching his wife walk past their children without a flicker, that finally cracked the spell. He stood in the wreckage of the broken mug with Danny crying in his arms and Sophie clinging to his leg. And he looked at me, and his face wasn't angry anymore. It was the face of a man waking up from a long, drugged sleep into a house he didn't recognize. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. "Mom, what is happening?" I went to him. I put my arms around all 3 of them, my son and my grandbabies, in that beautiful empty house with its sold-off furniture and its stone facade, and I held on. It did not all heal that morning, and I won't pretend it did. The months after were brutal. The house went into foreclosure because Tara had been pulling equity out of it for a year. James lost it. He and the children moved into my house, into the same bedrooms he and his sister grew up in. and for a long time he could barely speak, drowning in shame and debt, and the slow horror of recounting 7 years and realizing how much of it had been a performance staged around him. He learned things in the months that followed that I won't put in this telling because they're his to carry. The detective recovered a portion of what Tara had hidden, about $9,000 in an account she hadn't yet moved offshore, and it went toward the children, toward a fresh start. Tara, or Tracy, took a plea deal and is serving time, and there are detectives in 2 other states now interested in talking to her about husbands 1 and 2. It's been a little over a year. James has a job again, a modest one, nothing like the life Tara had insisted they perform for the neighbors, and he's happier in it than I've seen him in a decade. Sophie sleeps in a new bed in her father's old room and calls it the best room in the world. Danny has stopped being so quiet. He's loud now. Gloriously loud, the way a 4-year-old ought to be. We're a strange little household, 3 generations under one paid-off roof, and it is the fullest that house has felt since my husband was alive. A few weeks ago, James and I were doing dishes after supper, and he was quiet for a while. And then he said, without looking up from the pot he was scrubbing, "Mum, I said something to you that morning. I asked what you did, like you'd done something to us." He set the pot down. "You saved us. You saw what I couldn't see, and instead of saying, 'I told you so,' instead of just keeping your money and washing your hands of me, and God knows I gave you every reason to, you risked everything to get us out. I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't think there's a way." I told him the truth, which is that there's nothing to thank me for, that this is just what a mother is, that we don't stop loving you because you choose wrong. We don't stop loving you because you push us away. We love you through it, all the way through, even when it costs us everything we have. He nodded, and he wiped his eyes with the back of a soapy hand, and we finished the dishes. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same table where I'd read that text more than a year before. And I thought about the woman I'd been that night, frightened, hurt, certain she'd lost her son for good. I wished I could reach back through the months and tell her to hold on, that love isn't the soft, pretty thing the greeting cards sell, that sometimes love looks like cancelling the money. Sometimes it looks like hiring a stranger to dig up the truth. Sometimes it looks like smiling across a dinner table at a person you want to scream at, just to buy 3 more days. And sometimes, if you're stubborn enough and lucky enough and you refuse to let go, love looks like your grown son crying into a dish towel, found again, home again, safe. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed in a house full of the people I love. And for the first time in a long time, I slept the whole night through. The night I read that text in my kitchen, I believed the worst thing that could happen to a mother had already happened. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about so much. The worst thing wasn't being pushed away. The worst thing was how close I came to letting my own hurt make the decision for me, to simply keeping my money and my pride and turning my back, telling myself James had made his bed. If I had done that, the children would have woken one morning in an empty house with their father drowning in a debt that wasn't his, and a woman who had vanished with everything that could be sold. Every good thing that came afterward came because I made one choice differently. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody tells you when you're young. The smallest decision, made in the worst moment, decides everything downstream. I think about what actually saved us, and it wasn't anger. Anger got me to cancel the payments, but anger alone would have stopped there, satisfied. What carried me further was the decision to keep caring about 2 grandchildren who weren't asking for me, to refuse to let a person be discarded just because discarding them was easier. That's the part I'd want anyone watching to hold on to. When Patricia stopped me in that hardware store and I felt the floor tilt, I had a choice to look away and call it none of my business. Doing the right thing is almost never convenient, and it rarely feels like a reward in the moment. It mostly feels like fear, but being good-hearted isn't enough on its own, and I learned that too. If I'd simply confronted James or marched over and accused Tara, I'd have warned her and lost everything. It took clear thinking to slow down, to listen to Walter, to understand that the truth has to be proven and not just felt, that you sometimes have to sit smiling across a dinner table from the very person you'd like to scream at, just to buy 3 more days. Loving someone and being smart about how you protect them are 2 different muscles, and you need both. And then there's the part nobody can do for you, the simple refusal to quit. 11 days of waiting, 17 unanswered calls before my son finally picked up, a foreclosure I couldn't stop, months of him barely speaking, the slow work of rebuilding from nothing in the same bedrooms where he grew up. None of it healed fast. None of it healed cleanly. It healed because I stayed, because I kept showing up when there was no sign it would ever pay off. So if you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Keep your heart soft enough to act when something's wrong. Keep your head clear enough to act wisely. And keep your spine strong enough to outlast the part where it hurts. My son sleeps under my roof now and he's free, and my grandbabies are loud and happy. That is the whole reward. It was always going to be enough.